Hello? 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 Oh, there we go. Got a little twisted here. Hello? Hello, hello. Okay. I think we're in the zone of audibility here. Maybe just pump it up a tiny bit. So, hi everyone. Welcome, and thank you for coming. I am the Meg robot, which says the things, which I should say. Sometimes I mess up. So, I hope everybody had a really great weekend. Had a very peaceful weekend. It's above freezing today. Yay! You may have noticed that last week I have like one job to do up here, and that's lecture and record it for all of the students in this class, and I didn't do it. It actually just was basically a video of me talking, which nobody wants. The screen is really important, so I had to redo it from home. So if you're watching from home, you may notice the recording style is a little bit different. It was recorded using different system, and So I thought I would get through the semester without having to have you all be introduced to my cat. That did not happen, and I guess I'm pretty okay with that. So let's jump into the material. I guess, the result of, having that one video that I had to redo is that I did just go ahead and kind of work through the same material. So things might look ever so slightly different because I did them, twice, and I probably didn't do them exactly the same way. But this is where we're at. Just to make it sort of even for everybody, I made some changes to the whole setup of our where we left off. So I made the room an awful lot bigger, just to kind of give myself some options in terms of like zooming, so it wouldn't be cut out like that, or I wouldn't have to deal with the edges. So that's one big change that I made. I moved some stuff around a little bit. I moved the lamp back into the kind of the corner of the room. I also just moved the boat a smidge. I kind of rotated and moved and maybe scaled a tiny bit these sort of grass objects. They were sort of like right on top of the boat in a way that just didn't, I don't know, it looked kind of congested and kind of clogged up to me visually. So I moved them out. So if we want to kind of involve them more heavily, we can, just by kind of moving the camera. Or we can kind of get into a situation where, they're not so prominent. So we can kind of decide that as we go along. So what is our mission today, aside from making sure that the recording is proceeding as planned, which it is? Our mission today is to really talk about materials and rendering in Rhino. And so I think we will definitely be doing that today. There's a couple of little changes that I wanted to make to this scene to kind of maybe just refresh our memory about what is going on even. Also, the other thing I did while you weren't here in this context is that I just kind of organized. I did some organization on the layers. So the cooler actually had the lid as a separate layer, and I incorporated that into this as a sublayer. So if you want to do that, obviously we've had this for the boat. We went ahead and said new sublayer. You can also add any layer to another, kind of thusly. And you can make it a sublayer in that way. So I think I'm gonna, nope, not do that. I'll have to pull it out. And now it should just be on the same level. So as pointed out, let me just drag this. I'm gonna actually get rid of the cooler in this layer. Yes, please, delete. So anyway, I did all that before we got started today, just because I wanted to kind of make things run a little more efficiently. So basically today is going to be all about sort of like adding textures, and a lot of people have asked me questions about color. lot of people have asked me questions about color in Rhino, and really what we see right now on the screen is just layer color, and that's for our own sort of organizational purposes. There is such a thing as color that shows up in a rendering, but it's not usually layer color. Although you can set it up that way, it's just not really the way probably a lot of people do it. It's not the way I do it. So we're going to actually use images and materials to dictate the color of these objects. Okay, okay, maybe I should have some chill beats in the background. I don't know. Okay, so anyway, probably the first thing that I want to do that's like not necessarily related to materials and rendering is that we have this big lamp back here, and you may recall that right now we have 3 light objects in the room. So I'm just going to get this out of here for now. One of the things that I did was I made these 2 spotlights. I put them in their own layer called light objects, just because it seemed like a good thing to do. I kind of always do that, because that way you can turn the lights off if you need to. So I've got these 2 light objects that are spotlights, and they seem pretty well placed right now. You know, I'm getting kind of a nice little dome there, and I can play around with the hardness of that, because we probably do want to soften this up a little bit as we get into our rendering. But right now, these seem totally fine. They're just kind of hanging out there. I also have one more light object, and that's this sort of like mysterious point light that we did at the end of class that is sort of casting light all over the place. And so probably what I think would be really nice is right now we have 1 point light, and you can see it's kind of in the middle of the object. So probably I think it would be a really good idea if we just had a couple more point lights. So I'm just going to cut and paste it and kind of literally slide it up using ortho. I'm just going to slide it up the thing until it looks reasonable. Now here, because this point light, I'm going to have 3 of them together, I might want to kind of like knock it down a little bit in the intensity. So I can go over to this light properties and maybe put it down at like 50%. It also looks like it didn't quite go exactly where I wanted it to, so right now it's on top of the other one. So I'm just going to make sure that I have ortho enabled when I do this move. And now it should pop up. And then I can certainly just cut and paste it again and pop it down to the kind of middle of the bottom. And the only reason I'm doing this is really just for maximum disco effect. I just kind of want it to be something that we can really play with. Now, this one also popped over. Oh, so annoying. So as I'm moving this, I'm having this sort of like classic Rhino problem, which is it seems to be snapping all over the place. So I'm going to disable my object snaps, and now it's sort of really adhering to that ortho movement parameter. Well, so that's nice. Isn't that nice? So great. So now we have maximum disco lights. So I just wanted to kind of like also maybe think about ideas for light and color. So it seems like because these lights, these point lights, are not sort of really dominating the scene. I mean, they're definitely visually present, but they're not making up the most light in the scene. That would be the spotlights. So we could kind of think about maybe playing around with color with these. I'm not going to come back and play around with color in the light until I get the materials set up. Just because strategically the materials come along with their own color. So, we don't really, it just seems weird to think about that ahead of time. Okay, so materials. Well, we could start literally anywhere. Probably the first thing you want to do is I'm going to bring up a folder here. I have a small collection of materials. And when I say materials, these are actually not materials per se, they're JPEG textures. So a material, we'll look at the difference between a material and a texture. A material is kind of like specifies a bunch of different parameters like transparency and bump mapping and shininess. So you can have a texture be part of a material, but a material is not a texture. Material is a container for a texture. So I have a bunch of textures here. I'm going to talk about how to download these from the web at some point. So it looks like I have but I'll just show you what I have, just so we kind of know what we're working with. So let's see. This is a really great wooden floorboard texture. One of the reasons that I like this texture a lot is because it's incredibly seamless, so it will actually repeat nicely. It also doesn't have a whole lot of variation from dark to light across the image. In general, when you're using textures, you want to avoid images that have areas of dark and light, because then when you go to tile the texture or repeat it, it's going to look like a checkerboard, or it's going to have this like really kind of nasty looking sort of pattern that gets stuck onto it. So I've got some wood grain wood grain textures as well, just different textures. These are not 100% repeatable, but they can be used for smaller objects. That's last semester. And this is a really great texture for stucco or for wall texture. I mean, I'm sure that we all know that wall, like this drywall stuff, does actually have a texture, and that it's not just sort of like a seamless white field. So we'll look a little bit at wall texture, have a carpet, another wood floor texture, and some water. So anything outside of that we need during this class time, we are going to find on the internet for free. So let's go ahead and kind of start with probably the most obvious thing for a texture. First of all, I think I'm going to go ahead and just knock back the file just to make it a little bit more easy to deal with. I'm going to lock the room box, make sure the room box is locked, and probably even maybe just get rid of the grass for now. So really, we kind of just are going to focus on the boat. And there we go. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to go ahead and texture this outer, well, actually, let's do the floor first. So in order to do the floor, I'm going to have to unlock the room box, select this. This is probably the most straightforward texture we'll do. So you notice that when we click on the surface or polysurface or solid, it comes up with this sort of palette which says Properties Objects. Now, this stuff is kind of not super relevant to what we're doing, so we're going to go over to this tab that looks like a tube of toothpaste. Because when I think of material, of course I think of toothpaste. And so we want to go pretty much immediately to making a new material. There are prefab materials in Rhino, and we will talk about how to use those very briefly in just a second. So first we're going to make our own material. So we're going to click this button and go to Custom. Ta-ta. And right now, all we're going to do here is assign a texture. And so I think actually probably one of those wood flooring textures would work really well because boats tend to be made with small pieces. Like shiplap is what they call it. So I could probably try this one. And we're on the floor. So this is a great texture. Now, you may notice that we probably, if we're supposed to sit in that boat, this wood flooring is awful large, right? It's probably 2 or 3 times as large as it should be if I'm supposed to sit here, or anyone else for that matter. So we can scale and rotate textures. So it's a little kludgy. It's not super seamless. But you click on this thing over here that says, kind of has your image listed as a link. And then it comes up with this content editor. For some reason, when I open mine, it's like this big, and you have to kind of go in there and actually expand it, which is a little annoying. But you'll see here, this is your bitmap texture. And to scale it, you kind of have to think about the overall scale of the thing as it is presently. So right now, you can say, OK, it's like maybe 2 or 3 times too big. Well, then if we set the repeat parameter at 2, theoretically, it should cut it in half. So you can see it did definitely scale it down. And what we're looking at now is basically going to be like a scaled version. So if we want to make it smaller, we can put in like 2.5 or 3 even. Let's do 3. And now we've got sort of like a sort of, looks like it's probably about yay big. We are definitely guesstimating in this process. And it does that kind of glitchy thing where it's like, nope, I changed my mind, and then nope, I didn't. But yeah, it'll work out. So I think next I probably want to do the boat, and I'm basically going to choose whichever object or whichever floor texture I didn't use just now. So it looks like I have the boat locked. I'm going to have to unlock it. And you can see that in the boat, it's basically asking me to kind of texture the piece, or well, I'm selecting the pieces one by one. I could select them all and just texture them all the same, but in the case of this boat in particular, that sounds like kind of a crappy idea because I have pieces where the texture will have to run in different directions. Like here, we want the texture to probably run this way. And then back here, it would probably be a good idea if the texture ran maybe this way or maybe even up. So it's kind of like really whatever you want to do as far as whether you want to do them all at once or not. We could do them all at once, I guess, just to make it easy. But definitely probably not the best thing. Not the best thing to do. So one fun thing that you can do is that you can actually set up a layer material. So in this case, our layer is not, this layer is not composed of objects that we want to have all with the same material. So that's not really a good solution for us here. But I'll try to remember to show you how to do that on a layer where we do just have maybe one thing. Probably the lamp would be a good case for that. Okay, so we're going to just go to material. Then we're going to click the plus button to add a new material. And then we're going to set that map up. So I'm pretty sure that last time I did the free wood with 3D mapping one. I think I'm going to try for this one. They look suspiciously similar. That's okay. And so basically, I just want to apply that texture to every surface. And so give me just a second to select this stuff. Oh, there we go. And I think I have all of them now. I guess I could probably go ahead and take the bench at this point. And I'm just going to grab the Polysurface because that makes it a little bit easier. So if those objects were grouped, I probably could just texture them all at once. Hey, guess what? You may notice that that custom texture that I just made, it's saved in this list. So I can apply it to other things easily. So I can just apply the same texture twice. Now, if I wanted to get in here and kind of deal with these individually, well, there's a couple of things going on right now. One thing you may notice is that this seems to have a sort of conflict, right? Where when you roll it around, it's like flickering, and it's sort of asking, like, am I a texture? I don't know. I'm so confused. The reason is if we click on it, you can see there's a surface and a polysurface exactly in the same place. And so all we would have to do is just get rid of that surface to kind of reveal the texture underneath. So when you have two objects existing in the same space at the same time, and one of them has a texture and one of them doesn't, that's not great. You should fix it by deleting one of those objects. Okay, so let's kind of maybe think about just making like a slight change to one of these. So I'm not super thrilled with the way that this surface, no, not that one. I'm not super thrilled by the way that this surface is kind of holding the texture. And I'd like to try to maybe reorient the texture a little bit. So all I need to do is to because it's shared, I can create a unique copy of the texture or the material in this case. And then it's going to allow me to not so much. Let's see. Let me try that one more time. Okay. So it looks like the texture mapping for this object is contained in this texture mapping tab, which is a little bit different than it usually is. So under the rotation, you can basically, it says UVW rotation over here. That's where you can start to think about rotating it. And it's not super straightforward, like, so now it looks like we've achieved like a 90-degree rotation, which is good. And that's pretty much what I was looking for, was just like flipping it the other way. If you don't create objects like in a batch like we just did, if you do them individually, you'll have a different option to edit the texture after the fact. And so as we kind of explore textures with different objects and different sort of scenarios, we'll see how that works. So it looks like my boat is pretty much fully textured. And except, let's go ahead and just finish up the whole boat. So we have our sort of unicorn horn here. I was definitely thinking gold for this. Is there any other choice? I don't know. So as we're sort of adding a new material that we haven't used yet, we can click this plus button again. And down here are all the sort of textures and materials that are built into Rhino. Some of them are really good, and some of them are kind of eh. So ones that are kind of eh, glass is just kind of a difficult material because, you know, it's glass. Probably glass, I think, is the most difficult to work with for sure. When you can get it to work and you get the settings just right, it's gorgeous. The easy textures to work with would probably be the plaster, plastic, paint, metal. Those are all sort of like guaranteed success, where you don't have to mess with them too much. So let's go ahead and go for metal. And when your texture sort of activates, it actually has like a bunch of sort of parameters. So you can set up the color. So we said we wanted gold, I think. So it just so happens that I have a gold stored in here. And then for a bump texture, we want nothing. We want it to be perfectly smooth, but there are textures that you can apply to it. And then for polish, we probably want it to be like almost 100%. Like I want it to be super blingy, super glamorous. And you might be like, here, in this case, and rightly so, you would be like, yeah, that doesn't look super glamorous. And I would remind you that this is a preview. So you're not really going to get a lot of the advanced functions of materials and rendering until you actually make a render. So if I were to just flip the lights on right now and we were to make a render right this very second, so now the lights are on. We are starting to get some shine that we can see, which is like helpful, but it doesn't really capture, what's gonna happen when we render. I'm gonna hold y'all in suspense for just a little while longer. So now that we're sort of like working with maybe a metal texture, we could apply this to have a metal texture. I want it to have like a slightly different texture than this object here. So I'll just assign it with probably something like a little bit more like a brushed aluminum sort of look. So I'll go with like a middle gray or light gray. Under polish, I actually don't really want it to be that polished. And for bump texture, let's just maybe give it like the hatch, I think would be. And for scale, I'll choose small. So you may be noticing that I've been seeing a tiny bit of beach ball. Let me real quickly just see if I have any. Oh, okay, well. So if you're ballin', and I don't mean wealthy, it is probably a good idea to like turn off any other apps that you have running that are going to demand a lot of system attention. So that should do it for me. And then, of course, you also, can just use your patience muscle because rendering takes time. So you can see now we have this like shiny metal object. Another note on performance issues. Things that make computers perform poorly in the context of 3D rendering, well, obviously your computer would be number one, but aside from that, transparency, reflections, glass, those are the types of materials that are most demanding for the computer. So if you're really having serious problems rendering, you might want to rethink some of your material choices. Like if you have like a palace of glass, that sounds really, really cool, but it also sounds really difficult to render. So, okay, so there's one more thing I want to do here with the this sort of wing thing. And it looks like I have two objects that I'm going to have to probably ungroup because I want them to be different materials. So here, I want this to be sort of a single material, and I want it to share, I want them all to be the same, basically. So this is another case where I can come in and kind of do a batch texture or apply a texture to multiple objects. And so none of these textures are kind of doing the trick for what I want. So I want to create a new texture. In this case, I want to do something that Rhino probably doesn't really know or care or want me to do. So I want to make it look kind of like rice paper or something like that. And that's totally not an option on this list. So I think that I could probably misuse the metal texture and the hatch texture and just make it the metal, actually, now that I'm thinking about it, the metal shader can't be translucent. So I'm probably going to go ahead and just go with plastic. The plastic material is really, it's very versatile. So in this case, I want it to stay white. I want it to be very transparent. So maybe like 80%, yeah, that's perfect. Clarity, we could turn the clarity down a little bit. Maybe a little more. And then I will probably apply a bump texture to it. Maybe I'll just use this hatch texture again, only I'll make it extra large, extra large. And so, yeah, that looks great. I can kind of just go with that. Now, I I want to go ahead and select these sort of rail objects. Surface. Do I want the surface? Polysurface. So the answer to all of these selection questions is polysurface. And I'll go ahead and see if I can just grab these. This is where, like, if we had these on a separate layer and they were grouped, that would probably make me really happy right now. But we didn't do it because sometimes it's just a lot of work to, like, keep cleaning up after yourself and organizing after yourself. Okay. So now I have these selected. I think I'm going to give these a wood texture, and I think I'm going to probably use one of the more, like, less tiled wood textures. I'll probably use, like, one of the ones that was sort of just a minimal wood grain. And I'm pretty sure I want it to sort of maybe match a tiny bit. So I think this one is probably the closest in hue. Although we don't have to get that picky. And so at this point, I'm probably just going to group these while I have them all selected. And that's just in case I have to kind of come back and play around with the settings on this. That looks pretty decent. I think I can live with that. And so now we've just got two things left to texture. This is like a texturing rampage. We've got the grass, which I believe is right here. So also in Rhino, there is no such thing as a grass material. You can look for leaf textures online, but really, like, you're usually going to find, like, the webbing of a leaf or that structure, and that's, like, not what we want at all. So I think probably just going for something like maybe even using the plastic material and just going for some kind of material that has a little bump texture and then a little bit of green should probably be fine. So I went ahead and just selected all the objects in the layer. That was a little bit of a payoff there from putting all those things in a layer. And I'm going to make a new texture. I'm going to go for plastic again. And in this case, I do want the transparency at 0. I want them to be kind of midland shiny, maybe a tiny bit of grit. And then, let's see, a color. So I'm going to just pick, like, some sort of, like, dark greenish color, something like that. When you are picking colors, by the way, I mean, you do have to kind of take into account that there's light and dark in the scene. So your color, if it's really light or really dark, you know, it might do weird things with the shadows and light. So that's one thing to think about. So let's go ahead and get these down there. Okay, great. And then last thing is I wanted to apply that little kind of bump texture to the walls. And so we're going to use it as a color texture. Like, all of the textures that we've made are color textures. We're just kind of not really getting into bump textures in this class. But I've gone ahead and selected the 2 white walls. And I should have my image somewhere back in here. It is white stucco plaster texture. I do know from using this before that I'm going to have to scale it way, way down because it's, like, scary right now. So probably, I think I usually tile it like 5 or 6 times, or maybe even more, maybe 10, because I don't want the texture to be super visible. I want it to be really fine. And now you can see it's, like, hardly visible, which is actually what I want. I really only want this texture to show if the camera were, like, right up on the wall, right? But it does make a difference because when you put a texture on something like a white wall, it affects the way light is going to bounce off the wall. So if you're, kind of nutty about that kind of stuff like me, it'll make you happy. So now we're getting like really close to, some materials and some sort of things that we can go ahead and render. So I'm noticing here just real quickly that there's a couple of curves that I went ahead and sort of left out. So probably one good thing to do would just be a tiny bit of cleanup here. If I go to the Edit Select Objects menu, I could just select all the curves. Oh, hello. And then I could throw them into the construction curves layer. Someone asked in class, I think it was last class, someone asked if curves were visible when you rendered. And the answer is no, not really. There's a setting for that. So I think I'm just kind of like rotating for a good view here. When you make a rendering in Rhino, it's going to be proportional to whatever view you choose to render. It seems like we're definitely going for the perspective view here. So we're going to sort of like, I'm just trying to kind of like move it around and capture it just the way I want it. Let's go ahead and make a rendering. We are so ready for rendering. So our rendering, by the way, might look almost completely different. Not completely. I mean, it's going to have a boat and a lamp in it, but the way that the shadow and light kind of plays around forms will be significantly different. So first thing I want to do is go to Render Properties and make sure that everything is set up correctly for us. So when you open up the properties document, you can choose between the legacy Rhino render and the Rhino render. What's the difference, you may ask? Well, the Rhino render is actually a ray traced render, and the legacy Rhino render is not. So if you have a lot of glass or a lot of like difficult kind of fidgety materials, it may look better in the Rhino render, but I will tell you, and it actually says in the assignment sheet, that the legacy Rhino renderer is completely sufficient for this project and for pretty much everything we're doing in this class, because the legacy Rhino render renders in about a 10th or a 20th of the time. So, and I don't think that the quality results are that much worse, which is why they still include it in the software. So, you can kind of play around with that choice for yourself. Every model is different, and every model renders at a different speed. But definitely, if you do have a glass palace, the Rhino renderer will possibly take weeks to render it if you choose, if you give it that option. So yeah, I would probably, a good idea to kind of get into rendering is to render at a kind of relatively low resolution, which is what we're asking you all to do. So we're asking you to, if you go to custom here, you can scale it to 1080 by 1980 pixels. And we're just asking for that in one dimension, by the way. So it would have to be 1080 in its largest dimension. If you lock it to the viewport size, let me go ahead and, yeah, okay. And then we go to custom. If you have it locked to the viewport size, it will scale accordingly. So that's fine for now. We can kind of mess with that. The DPI here is completely irrelevant because you're already specifying the pixel size. So probably just leave it the way it is. You don't really need it to be anything other than that because we're going to be looking at these objects on the screen. For quality, I would make your first rendering at draft quality, and I would work up from there. Why do I say work up from there? Because if you hit problems and you're doing a draft quality, rendering, that might be an indication that you need to rethink some of your choices in the model and maybe make it less complicated. If you are able to produce a final quality rendering, that would be wonderful. We would love to see that. I think a good quality rendering is what we're actually asking for. But I think a draft quality rendering is kind of how I roll when I'm just getting set up and I know I'm going to have to render it like, I don't know, maybe 10 or 15 times while I'm kind of moving stuff around and changing settings. So why would you do a final quality render if you're still not really sure what you want? So I would start at draft and kind of go up from there as your project locks itself in. And the only other major sort of thing that I need you to do on the settings is I need you to turn off the skylight or the sun. Both of these should be off because we're asking you to set up your own lighting. And so, yeah. And then I guess other things, there's this whole set of choices you can make about whether to render the wireframe aspect of your project. I've seen people do really cool things with that, so that's a choice you can make. It's a creative choice. Most people don't do it. We're not going to do it in this class, but I can think of lots of reasons why you would want to do that. So, and that's pretty much it. We're ready to render. So notice that right now, just to recap, we're using the legacy Rhino render. We're rendering the viewport. I'm rendering it at 1080 by 1080 in draft quality. So hopefully, by the time we're done today, we can get maybe a good quality rendering out of this. Usually what I do is I'll actually make the final quality rendering in either renderer of the demo today, and then I'll post it to Canvas so you all can look at it and see the difference. Because like I said, there is a pretty tangible difference. So then it brings up this like other window to kind of play with. And from here, when it finishes, you can kind of save the rendering as a JPEG or a bitmap. And here it is. So just like super quickly, even at draft quality, I think we can definitely agree that there's some major differences, right? In general, like the rendering appears like much more shadowy. It also has light that sort of, the light behaves differently when it touches surfaces, right? It actually like controls its edges and such. You can see the spotlight edges are completely different. So if I just show you real quickly, you can see here the spotlight edges are showing up in the preview as being really hard, but here you can't even see them. So let's do another one, and we can kind of maybe really play with the positioning and stuff. Okay. So I'm going to just once again render this. So I changed my window size just a little bit. So I'm going to go into, no, thank you. I tried to click the little triangle there. Yes, go away. Yes. There we go. And so, we can keep rendering it to 1080. You can basically render it to whatever size you want. I mean, if I were sort of saving this for myself, for my own work, I would probably render it at least 3,000 pixels in one dimension, because if I did that, it would give me the ability to make like a really nice print if I wanted to, or also, just a kind of like a high-res image. Again, we're not going to be sort of like doing that in class because we just don't have the time. It would probably take maybe 20, 30 minutes to render that. But what I am going to do is I'm going to bump this into good quality, and we'll have more time to talk about rendering next class period. I'm going to go ahead and just do this one at good quality and see how it comes out. And like I said, I'll do some tests for you all this afternoon, just so you can kind of get some visual comparisons about what the different rendering methods do. You may notice that this legacy Rhino renderer is rendering this in less than 2 minutes, less than 3 minutes. That's really great. If I did this with the Rhino renderer, I am pretty sure that it would take significantly longer. Like, up to maybe a half hour. And I guess, for me, the reason I will put the test comparisons up there is because in a lot of cases it's not really worth it. So this is still going. So here we got some funky shadows, which was one of the things that I was kind of looking for. Okay, well, it looks like as our rendering is kind of completing, it looks like we're pretty much done for the day. So I'll just get it zoomed up here. And yeah, have a wonderful day, everyone. I'll see you on Thursday. Yeah. And we'll talk more about rendering and kind of all the things you can do with materials. It's a lot.